Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We had left off on Kitab al-Ijara. Inshallah, today we've got a few interesting masail, and there's still more to come. Inshallah, we had mentioned that Ijara is to do with hiring and rentals. And you're hiring somebody to do a service for you, you get some work from them, or you're renting some sort of asset, property, car, etc. And we now reached some new masail. The first is, when is the person who is renting out or providing the service, when do they deserve the payment? Okay. Because as you know, that you're asking for a service or you're asking to rent a building or whatever it may be, etc. When is this payment due? In the Hanafi books, they tell you in one of three instances. The first is the first is if the owner or if the person providing uh, this car, for example, or the piece of land for you to stay on the house, if they stipulate that you must pay before occupancy, then it is permissible. And if that is in the contract, then it's allowed. And it happens, for example, sometimes you're renting, let's say, a shop, and the condition is when you move in, you pay rent already. So you're paying for the first month, even though you haven't used it for 1 month. If that's the condition, then that is allowed. Okay. The second is, and bearing in mind that the person still hasn't used the service, or they haven't used that house or car, whatever it may be. The second is if the tenant or the renter, they want to pay in advance, even if it's not stipulated. Okay. Here it is also permissible. So let's say, for example, you're renting a house and the landlord tells you that you pay at the end of the month. And you tell him, you know what, I've got some extra money I want to pay now. It's permissible. Okay. No harm. You allowed if he accepts. Number three is when you've taken the service or you've used, let's say you staying in a house, and whatever the period of time agreed was, let's say it's a week, for example, you're on weekly rental, then here every week, once you've lived that week, you will have to pay. Okay. Or if it's a month, you'll have to pay, etc. All this is simple, straightforward, makes common sense. But why are they telling you this? What they're trying to tell you is that when you're going to use, uh, let's say, a car or a building or some sort of inanimate object, or you're hiring somebody to work for you on a time basis, here they can stipulate the payment to be made at the very beginning, or you can pay early, or after you've used that service. However, there's certain people who by default, they're not allowed to ask you, or they're not supposed to ask you for money in advance. And that's if you've hired somebody to give you a result, okay, to produce an item. And they give the example of a tailor, okay? So they tell you that as for a tailor, he's not supposed to ask you for money in advance to say, I'm going to sew you this thobe, it's worth 200, so pay me 200 now, okay? Here, if you don't want to do that, you don't have to. And in Hanafi madhab, they tell you that he's not allowed to do it. What tends to happen is, or what we could come to a middle ground and say what's fair. When it comes to people who we hire in this second category, people who are going to produce something for you, at times they may need to take some a small amount in order to buy the raw materials. If it's a builder, they need to buy the bricks or whatever it may be. Let's say you've agreed on building a wall and the wall is 20,000. The problem is if you pay him his 20,000, he might run away with the money and might not do your work. And he's worried if he starts off, or he wants to start off, but he doesn't have enough material. So you agree on a small amount and you start off. Also, what they say is, uh, if you agree on levels, okay, or you agree on targets, then that's also permissible. So let's say somebody is building you a house, especially this is true when it's bigger projects, and you say, okay, for phase one, when you build the wall, will give you 10,000, and then when you start laying the foundation, it's 5,000, and so every time they reach a target, and that's also to avoid dispute and make it easy for the person asking for the service because they don't have to throw all their money down, and it's also making it easy for the one providing the service because they can use that money to buy raw material, etc. So they mention this in the Hanafi books, and bearing in mind this is always when it comes to do with a dispute or if there's a dispute. As for if people happily agree, then as long as it's not haram, you can agree on what you want and you're allowed to forfeit any of your rights. Okay? Then they move on to another interesting masala, again in the Hanafi madhab. Are you allowed to tell somebody, for example, let's say you're telling them to sew your thobe. You tell them that if you do it in one day, I'll give you 100. So meaning, let's say you do it today, I'll give you 100. And if you do it tomorrow, then I'll only give you 50. Is this type of agreement allowed or not? Similarly, uh, if somebody, what you could build on this is, for example, if somebody charges extra for express, okay, they tell you 3 days shipping, we'll charge you $5. However, if you want it today and today, we'll charge you 10. In the Sharia, is that type of transaction permissible? In the Hanafi madhab, they allow it. Some say no because you haven't agreed on the aqd meaning the contract. Is it the 100? Is he going to deliver today or is he going to deliver tomorrow? The response to that is you, as the person asking for the service, have presented them two options. Both these contracts are correct as they are. It's upon the one delivering the service to choose. So here they give the example of the thobe, and they say if you sew it today, you'll get 100, and tomorrow, then I'll give you 50. As long as the tailor agrees, then that type of transaction is permissible. And based upon that, you can go higher. You can choose different items, especially when it comes to express, when it comes to premium, etc. So inshallah, that's also permissible. Then you've got a third mas'ala, which is also interesting. Are you allowed to change the rental according to the person who is going to receive your service? And they give the example of if you're renting a house, okay, and you say, I'm renting a house. If it's to a teacher, then the rental will be, let's say, 1,000, okay, for the month. However, if it's for somebody working in construction, it's going to be 1,500, okay? Is this allowed or not? In the Hanafi madhab, you got two opinions. Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam, is of the opinion that it's allowed. Why? Because it's two contracts which are correct, and you, as the landlord, or as the owner, are allowed to charge whatever you want to charge in this. Uh, as for the other two Imams in the madhab, Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad ibn al-Hassan, they're of the opinion that it's not allowed. And here their problem with it is if you go to somebody and you say that if it's going to be a teacher, 1,000. If it's going to be somebody working in construction, 1,500. You haven't, or your contract is not clear. Your offer is not clear. What are we choosing? Are we going with this or are we going with that? And again, Imam Abu Hanifa is of the opinion that it's allowed because you've presented them with two options which are both permissible. Okay. And built upon that, you'll find sometimes you've got a friend, okay, and let's say you've got 3 flats, 3 apartments. All 3 apartments are identical. However, this person you don't know and you charge them 500. This person you don't know, you charge them 500. And this person you know and you charge them 300. Just because you know them. Because you own them, according to your discretion, it's allowed. It's allowed. Okay? So here the issue is not whether you can, I don't want to use the word discriminate, but whether you can price differently. Here the argument is the contract. Is this type of contract allowed or not? Where you're charging this one, if it's this 1,000 and if it's this 1,500. Wallahu alam, you're allowed to do that. So built upon this, you'll find that, for example, express shipping, express laundry for you to do something for somebody quickly, we'll base it upon the second mas'ala to say you are allowed to do that. Thereafter, we move on to the hadith in Bulugh al-Maram. Hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu in Sahih al-Bukhari. He says, the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam says, إذا وقع الذباب في إناء أحدكم فليغمسه ثم لينزعه. He says that if a fly had to fall into your drinking vessel, let's say your cup, the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam says, if it fell in, you dip the whole thing in and then remove it. It says فَإِنَّ فِي أَحَدِ جَنَاحَيْهِ دَاء وَفِي الْآخَرِ شِفَاء. Because in one of the wings there is a poison and in the other wing there is cure. The reason why Ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentions this hadith in Kitab al-Tahara Babul Miyah, the chapter of water, is to show that if a fly had to fall into the water that you have, the water is still clean. Okay, because a fly, they say, doesn't have any flowing blood in it. And similarly, any other insects. So, for example, any other insects which are similar to a fly. So, for example, a bee or a wasp and those which are similar. If they had to fall into the water that you have, then the water still remains clean. So that's number one. Number two, if these creatures had to die in the water, in your cup or your little bucket or whatever it may be, the water is still clean. Why? Because they say they don't have flowing blood inside them. And then number three is or specifically with the fly, according to this hadith. The Messenger ﷺ says, when the fly falls in, and you've got to picture it and you've got to remember that in today's time, it's very easy. You have bottles of water that you can buy from the store. The water that comes out of your tap or your faucet is clean. You can drink, you can throw it away. In those days, it was a struggle to get water. It was a struggle to store water. They didn't have refrigerators. They didn't have piping. They didn't have electricity and electrical pumps to pump the water to the houses. They used to go and collect. They didn't have modern ways of storage such that, for example, they could put everything sealed and tight and store it for so long. No, they probably had their buckets and their vessels, which were very primitive, and maybe a fly or whatever insects which were similar to flies could fall into it. So the Messenger ﷺ is telling them that if the fly had to fall into it, what you do is dip it fully, because in one of the wings there is a type of poison, and in the other wing there is the cure for it. Wallahu alam. Some of the scholars mention that in modern research or modern science, they found that to be true. And as long as it's authentic from the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we believe it. Again, if this had to happen, especially in today's time, in those times you You can imagine that if somebody took or spent a whole day or few days to go and gather water, they probably still want to drink from it, or they probably have to drink from it. So he's saying that the water is still clean. If it had to happen in our time today, and a person didn't want to use that water or drink that water, inshallah, there's no harm in that. That's personal preference. However, the water will still remain clean. Wallahu a'lam. Inshallah, we've got, I think, two more or three more hadith for the chapter of water. And after that, I'll test you guys and we'll go over it.